Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. It is a pleasure to be with you on this, the 26th day of March. The sun is shining, and there is snow on the ground once again. And word has it that we're in for quite a warm-up, but New England is getting a taste of what we got a little bit of here. Although most of from what the weather channels suggest, most of the brunt of the storm is off the coast and out at sea. But apparently the islands and the Cape Cod area are getting pounded, and I guess probably Nova Scotia and Newfoundland will get pounded as well. It is a pleasure to be with you on this Wednesday afternoon, and I want to thank you for your willingness to turn in to today's edition of the Virtual Center. I want to thank you for your support and for coming back day after day and listening to these programs. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your loyalty to this program and to the Head On Radio Network. And again, I cannot overemphasize how really important it is to keep this voice out there and alive and being heard. It is incredibly important. I think at the end of today's program, once again, we'll have additional evidence to suggest as to just how important it is that we remain vigilant and that we continue to put out there, I think, an information-based analysis of the Constitution and the ramifications of the Constitution, because there are too many people that are taking too many liberties and suggesting meanings that aren't there, et cetera, et cetera. But again, I appreciate your willingness to tune into the program. I would love to hear from you. We would love to hear your opinions. I want to go back to a little bit about yesterday's program at the beginning today. But before I do that, I'd like to, first of all, acknowledge that we are, as we announced yesterday, an hour earlier today. It is a little bit after 3 p.m. in the East, so that we can finish our program today at 5 o'clock, and that will give me some time to get to a meeting which begins in town here at 5:30. Our phone number is area code 304-658-3333. That's area code 304-658-3333. My email address, waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien906@gmail.com. Forgot my own email address there for a while, but I don't send myself emails that often, so that's perfectly understandable. I don't want to chalk that one up to age. There's too many things I do have to chalk up to age, so I don't want to add to the list unnecessarily. It is, again, a pleasure to be with you today, and I hope that your day is going well, and I hope that we can contribute to make your day just a little bit more meaningful. In ways that I hope you would like it to be meaningful. If you are tuned into this program, and if you are a regular listener and participant in the Head On Radio Network, then my sense is that you do look to enhance your understanding and appreciation for the truth and for information on a regular basis. And for that, I thank you. In behalf of the people of this nation, we thank you. And we trust and urge you to continue to do just what you are doing. Yesterday, one of the items, I had mentioned an email that I received from Gene, which was a link to a story out of Indianapolis that the state of Indiana, the Board of Education, had rescinded its support for the Common Core standards. And we looked at an article that the link to which Gene had forwarded to me over the weekend, and we got into that yesterday, and we talked about some real questions about the opposition to the Common Core, what the basis of it is, etc. And you'll recall that one of the things that became perfectly clear to me was that the criticism of the Common Core, the real essence of the criticism to the Common Core, is not as it's being portrayed. It's very obvious that certain individuals, certain groups, and people of particular persuasions, what I'm talking about here are extreme conservatives, Tea Party types, etc., have serious questions about the Common Core. There are things about it that they don't like, the content. They don't like what it does. But the fact of the matter is, I believe, and this is totally my interpretation, in order to criticize the Common Core as to its content, it seems to me you are left trying to defend the tradition, trying to defend the system as it is, the educational system as it is. And it's kind of difficult to do that. So consequently, the opposition to the Common Core has adopted a strategy of focusing principally not on the content of the standards, but on who supports the standards, who was involved in the drafting of the Common Core standards, and who is advocating and supporting financially the approval of the Common Core standards. And it's very obvious that that is the context within which the ideological debate over the Common Core standards is taking place. But one of the things that came out in our program yesterday, and I wanted to revisit it because I think it's really important, is that the mere fact that the real opponents of the Common Core standards in Indiana, in the Indiana situation, are up in arms because the standards adopted by the Board of Education to replace the Common Core standards are in effect carbon copies of the Common Core standards themselves. So in a sense, the State Board of Education in Indiana, in taking a position of rescinding the Common Core standards, really didn't rescind them at all in terms of the content. They did, however, rescind the label. They made it possible for people to argue that they had taken a stand against the Common Core without actually taking such a stand. It looked like a rather politically shrewd move on the part of some people. Today, as a follow-up, Gene sent me yet another email related to the Indiana situation. And it is an article with a little bit more information than the one we focused on yesterday about the Common Core. Much of it is a repeat. And especially the information about the fact that 90%, more than 80% of the new standards in Indiana are duplicate copies of the Common Core, which in theory was rescinded. And one of the chief opponents of the Common Core standards, Dr. Sandra Stotsky, retired professor of education at the University of Arkansas, made the point, as we talked about yesterday, that it kind of makes a fool out of the governor. Because it suggests that there's a whole different set of standards, when in fact there is not. The article, the latest article goes on to point out that opposition is building as the public begins to realize it has been taken for a political ride. And I think you get a even greater flavor for the degree of opposition to the Common Core if I can share with you a paragraph or two from this coverage today, and I want to get back to the coverage because I think it's really important. Veteran Indiana educator Mary Black, who has been teaching for 40 years, also lambasted the attempted deception taking place in her state. Quote, "The truth about Common Core in Indiana is that we still have Common Core. It is just renamed," explained Black, who currently serves as curriculum director for Freedom Project Education, an online K-12 school dedicated to classical education and Judeo-Christian values. The commission established to write the new Indiana standards by Hoosiers and for Hoosiers, as Governor Pence put it, was filled by publicly known proponents of the Common Core, Black writes. One member of the commission that drafted the new state standards in Indiana was a representative of WestEd, the controversial organization connected originally to the federally funded Common Core testing regimes that also provide schools with a widely criticized data collection scheme known as positive behavioral intervention systems. We have renamed Common Core standards but are still bound to implement them by the federal government's waiver to No Child Left Behind, and have funding for the development of a statewide data system for our schools, Black added, referring to a massive federally funded information collection regime targeting students. Indiana has not dropped out of Common Core. Opponents of Common Core will have a difficult time convincing people that we have to get rid of it because so many have now been tricked into believing it's already gone. So there's a real political controversy going on in the state of Indiana over the Common Core. But what is surfacing here is that, excuse me, what is surfacing here is that there seems to be a felt need on the part of many people to take a political stand against the Common Core. But it's also pretty clear that if you look at common standards generally, you begin to recognize that the standards can't vary too much because there tends to be general agreement as to what educational reform is all about. It would stand to reason that the State Board of Education's version of standards wouldn't vary diametrically from Common Core anyway. They would have to be based on the same kinds of things, because the fact of the matter is the basis, the academic basis of the Common Core standards is sound. What people have concerns about is that many people believe that they take the rigor and quality out of education and they put more of an emphasis on working skills, on workplace skills, and on life skills more than on substantive content, and that's what bothers a lot of people. But the fact of the matter is, academically, the basis of the core of the Common Core is sound. It was developed by educators, by scholars who have done a lot of work in this field. Well, in reading this particular article that Gene forwarded me today, I realized that this article appeared in a publication called The New American. And lo and behold, The New American is a publication of the John Birch Society. So it stands to reason then that the whole approach to this debate would be skewed by where this particular article appears. Let me give you an example. I circled one paragraph here to give you an example of the kind of loaded rhetoric that one finds in this article. This is an example of why it is important to read carefully and critically, because it is important to pick up things like tone. And in these kinds of things, you begin to pick up intent and ideological perspective in what we read. Listen to this paragraph. In 2010, Indiana became one of the first state governments in the nation to accept Obama administration bribes in exchange for foisting the controversial national standards on schools. I would suggest to you that no reputable news journal would include a sentence which talks about the Obama administration bribes in exchange for foisting controversial national standards on its schools. Back to the text. It was done very quietly, and as in most of the 45 states that eventually capitulated to Washington, D.C., almost nobody noticed it at the time. Once parents and teachers began catching on, though, Indiana, along with the rest of America, was in open revolt against the usurpation of education by unaccountable establishment forces. And this suggests the context within which the battle of the Common Core is being waged. And the tone and the use of words in this piece suggests that it is not a news-focused account of the controversy. It is, in fact, a party to the controversy. And in my response, and I thank Gene very much for the link, and I made him aware of who publishes the New American. And basically the point is you need to read this very carefully because while there's a lot of information in there, there's a lot of political rhetoric as well. And you can tell by the tone that this particular piece seeks not to provide information about the particular issue. It seeks rather to persuade readers to a particular position on that issue. And I think that's a very, very important point. I wanted to bring it to your attention and to share with it. And of course, the article ends with the suggestion that Governor Mike Pence, who's a Tea Party favorite, has made known his intent to think about, at least, the possibility of making a run for the presidency. And so this particular publication sees his rather ambiguous stance on Common Core as part of a political strategy to keep one foot in the camp of the Obama administration in order to keep federal funding coming to Indiana, while at the same time satisfying the growing public opposition to federal power, to the federal administration control over education, and specifically to the Common Core standards. So this whole controversy is getting caught up in politics, as if it was ever separated from politics anyway. But I really believe that it's very, very important to keep this in mind. Those who are committed to sinking the Common Core want to sink it for reasons that are not being revealed clearly to the public, to the very people who are being enlisted for their opposition to the Common Core. In other words, those who are really behind this effort to sink the Common Core are not being honest with those they are trying to enlist into their campaign. What they are suggesting is that the Common Core is yet another example of an overbearing, obsessive, aggressive Obama administration effort to take control of all aspects of this society, and in this case, our education system. And it is, in fact, labeled, this is more evidence of the tone. The pressure to withdraw from the big business Obama-backed scheme eventually boiled over in Indiana, contributing to the fact that it became the first state to adopt Common Core and then officially withdraw. So again, suggesting a big business Obama-backed scheme to take over control of education in Indiana by imposing these Common Core standards. And of course, an awful lot is being made out of the amount of money going into the Common Core to support its adoption by the Gates Foundation, by the Bill Gates operation, and by other corporations and big business who are looking for a better educated workforce. I mean, that's obvious. We know that. So, in a sense, is what the Common Core promises a step back from a successful education system that is already underway? I would suggest that that's a tough one to prove. So consequently, the real opponents of Common Core don't go there. They don't want the attention to focus there. But that's where the real attention is. That's where the real objective is. We spent an entire program on the standards themselves. We looked at reading standards, we looked at history standards, social studies standards. And one of the things we saw in them was an emphasis on student activity. Students, in a sense, being required to take responsibility for their own education. And in the process is a translation which amounts to the following. Education is not a product, something that is delivered from the instructor to the student. Education is something that happens within or to the students as a result of engaging content. That's the kind of education that happens in the nation's best schools. It is not the kind of education that happens in most of our public schools. And we've spent an awful lot of time on the distinction and two separate systems of education. And we looked at Benjamin Rush, and we looked at Thomas Jefferson's plan for the general diffusion of knowledge. We look at a lot of it. We look for the support of the idea of universal education on the one hand, and at the same time, support by Adams and Jefferson and Washington and many of the others for the University of Virginia, for quality education, for National University, for the establishment of West Point. So it's very obvious that many of the founders are operating on the assumption that there are two separate approaches to education underway in this republic, and that's really what is necessary. One for those that will be the leaders, and the other kind of education that will be the prominent focus for the majority. And what we've talked about here at the Virtual Center over and over again, I was going to say ad infinitum, is the fact that in the process of doing that, in the process of separating education depending on the recipient, we are, in a sense, denying society the opportunity to derive the potential from the vast majority of our young people. By not exposing our young people to true education, which involves skills, which involves skills generated by content. Education is not the content. Education is what you, the student, do with the content. If you reflect upon it, if you evaluate it, if you compare it with other content in the same area, if you rank it, if you rate it, if you establish priorities within it. In other words, the 5 major points in the following piece of evidence, number 1 being the most important, number 5 being the least important. Here are the 5, and here are the reasons why number 1 is number 1 and number 5 is number 5. Students need to be able to do that. And when they are taught to do that, they can take control of their own education. They become the masters of the content rather than the content being master over them. Because content becomes something for people to do something with. And it's that doing something with, that engagement with the content, that is the essence of a quality education. That's the cognitive academic experience. Our leaders have gotten it from the very beginning. In a republic, if we are really going to be honest and seriously try to live up to the full potential of this republic, we owe it to all of our citizens to have an opportunity to experience and to engage true education. Only by doing that will we be able to find the talents and the skills and the innate talents and abilities of our individual, of each of our individuals, each of our citizens. We talked yesterday about the issue of American exceptionalism. I got an email from one of our listeners that said that term is being used in ways which have turned it into a pejorative term. Some people are just turned off by the very term American exceptionalism because of the way people have used it. But the fact of the matter is, exceptionalism is an important concept. It's a meaningful concept. The difference is we are not exceptional because we are already great. We are exceptional because we have the potential of becoming great. And the way we measure that potential, the way we measure our success in achieving that potential, is how close we can come to making opportunity available for all of our people. And in this world, in this nation, at this time, education is a key component of that. I think that's what drives the Common Core. That's what caused those people who sat down and put the Common Core standards together. That was their motive. That was their modus operandi. That's what they were about academically. I don't know. I'm not going to get into the issue of the testing companies and who's making money off the tests and all this other stuff. But I would suggest to you all of that is tangential to the academic realities of what the Common Core is about. By themselves, the Common Core standards do not promise educational reform. I accept that. Because the Common Core, if it's taken literally, if these standards are taken seriously, and teachers are required to seriously make an effort to meet them, then we're talking about a major reform in terms of the way our teachers teach. We're talking about educational revolution in this country. And the result of that revolution is going to be that individual citizens, young people, who heretofore never really had a chance at academic success, are for the first time going to be given that opportunity. That's a tremendous burden and a tremendous responsibility to place on our teachers, but it's there. And I really believe that the reason that so many states up to this point have requested waivers on the implementation of the Common Core is because it's becoming very obvious that our teachers, for the most part, are not up to this challenge. This is a totally different challenge because this goes all the way back into higher education, into the teacher preparation programs that basically created the academic background, the training of our teachers. And I don't like to personalize this too much, but I've been in this for 50 years. And there are some realities in our higher education system and situation that I think all of us need to recognize. Some of them aren't comfortable, some of them aren't pleasant, and so therefore they're not talked about. But the fact of the matter is that as a generalization, and this is a generalization, and I know that people can come up and point out exceptions to this, but from the experiences that I've had and the places I've been, I feel very comfortable in saying that for the most part, in institutions I've been in, and I've been in some good ones, graduate schools as well as undergraduate schools, as well as community colleges, and even I taught high school and middle school when I first began my teaching career. So I've taught middle school, I've taught high school, I've taught community college, I've taught four-year college, and I've taught graduate level classes over the last 48 years or whatever it happens to be. And one generalization that I can make, and I'm pretty comfortable with, is that in most of the places I've been, the teacher education program is the least academically rigorous program in the institution. And I know that a lot of people out there who teach would probably not like that. But it's true. An awful lot of people end up in education because they don't see success in any of the other majors that they could pursue. They're not comfortable with math, they can't do science, or they find science difficult. They don't like literature because they don't like poetry, and they find it too abstract. They don't feel like they have any talent in arts. They don't have any talent in music. And so consequently, by the process of elimination, many of them end up in teacher education. And many of them become very committed to teacher education, become very committed to children. Many of the people who go into especially elementary education do a tremendous job, and of course part of the answer to that is that our the youngest children come to school with a tremendous desire to learn and a thirst. And many elementary teachers are able to take advantage of that. They're dealing with kids on a day-to-day basis who want to learn. But it doesn't take long for that fire, that academic enthusiasm, to die out. And I think in many ways we have to accept the responsibility that we're the ones that kill it. Learning doesn't become boring, we make it boring. And I would suggest that part of that process is in the transition from the excitement and the enthusiasm of learning to the rote boredom of content. The shift in emphasis where education becomes, at a certain point in time, the delivery of more content and more content and more content and more content, to the point that teachers will openly say there aren't enough hours in the day for me to cover everything that I'm expected to cover. And the reason is because the amount of content that is presumably possible to inject into the curriculum is unlimited. And I think the internet has made that very clear. Google makes that very clear. You can find out anything about anything. The absurdity of an educational system based on ranking students based on how much of that content they can memorize and master is absurd on its face. Some people, a few people, relatively speaking, are able to master this. They become the academic successes. They're the ones that get the scholarships and foundation scholarships and the, get into the best schools and all of that. That's tradition. We understand that. And we assume it's a fair and equitable competition. But the fact of the matter is, what we are doing is discriminating. We are selecting the boy of best genius, in Jefferson's terms, and making a determination that that student should go on and these others should not. And in the process, we have no idea what we're losing potentially. Instead of trying to find out what our kids can do and what they excel at, we are imposing upon them an alien system of content-based information that they don't care about. And we are rewarding those who put up with it the longest. I guess that's what I could say. And to be honest with you, that's in some ways the system that these opponents of the Common Core are defending. I mean, they don't want to defend it because it's not politically popular to defend it. But the fact of the matter is that's the position they are in. The Common Core, just by writing a bunch of standards, is not going to change anything. But if our teachers really make an effort to teach to those standards and begin to ask of our youngsters the kinds of activities and the kinds of cognitive skills implied in those standards, education will change. And I guess what we have to accept is the fact that there are a number of people, I don't know how many, but there are a number of people who are much more comfortable with the status quo than they are change, because they know what the status quo is, they don't know what the change is going to be. And to be very honest with you, the potential of the change is frightening to a lot of people. Because in the process of opening up this can of worms and assuming that everybody potentially can think and learn and create and innovate and synthesize and analyze, by making that assumption that more people can do that than we ever believed could before, then what we are surrendering is the right to control what people think. We are basically saying to people, we want you to think. We thereby forfeit our right to control what you end up thinking. Society is afraid to make that call. That's a very, very threatening scenario for a lot of people. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is this is what's there. But the political situation associated with this Common Core is becoming very interesting. There's absolutely no question that many of the 45 states that have originally embraced the Common Core are having second thoughts. And realistically, part of it is because I believe an awful lot of our teachers are not able or up to the challenge of the Common Core standards. It's asking them to do in their classrooms with their students the kinds of abstract cognitive things that they've never been able to do themselves in classes that they took. They're being asked to teach something they've never ever seen. Because many of our college classes are based on the rote delivery of lecture information and the regurgitation of that information on tests. One of the most interesting pieces of information, I have it in my materials, and I didn't think to get it out before we went on the air today, so I'm kind of going from memory here, and it's about 3-week-old memory, so I'm not sure how accurately I'll be able to reproduce this, but it seems to be an appropriate story to relate right now. One of the major criticisms related to education right now is the change that is underway in the College Board exams. Major reform changes are taking place in the college boards, the exams that high school students take to get into college. It is the scores, the SAT scores, and the ACT scores that high school students get that determine their admission, that determine how much scholarship money they'll get. So much it revolves around these scores. Several years ago, a number of years ago, probably about 10, the College Board added an essay component to the SAT. And suddenly, high school students were faced with a new challenge, and that is to write an essay, to write meaningful essays and meaningful sentences, many of them coming out of high school situations where they'd never written anything in their lives. Their whole education has been a series of multiple choice and fill-in-the-blank exercises. And now, to get in to be competitive for admission into the best schools, they're being asked to write an essay. And the result is that the addition of that essay component to the SAT created a whole new entrepreneurial opportunity for many of these for-profit companies that began to offer SAT training programs on how to prepare for and how to improve your scores, your chances on the SAT exam. And these for-profit institutions had to build in training in the essay component as well. And so for a number of years, the children of the wealthy have been taking advantage of some of these very high-priced training programs. But the fact of the matter is they worked. Many of the students who had the luxury, the opportunity to take these prep courses, which are very expensive. Most kids, their parents couldn't afford these things. I mean, we're talking a 4 or 5 week training program that runs $600, $800, $1,000. Most people don't have that. Well, some research has been done. One of the changes that is taking place in the SAT now is that the essay requirement is being dropped. There's going to be an essay component, but it's going to be optional. And students are being given the opportunity to get around the essay component. And it really does protect children who come from an educational situation where they've never written anything in their lives. They didn't have a chance before. But a lot of the research that the College Board did in making these changes was based on looking at the experiences of those who went through these training programs. And I think one of the most revealing and illustrative examples as to how ludicrous, in many ways, the SAT exam itself is in terms of its ability to predict performance in college. That's the whole point of these things. What they used to tell people, kids going into the SAT, don't stay up all night, don't cram for it, you can't study for it. It's basically an exam which tests general knowledge, and by the time you take the test, you either know it or you don't, so don't worry about it. Just get a good night's sleep and eat a good breakfast that morning, and you'll be fine. And for a long time, kids believed this. But for the fact of the matter was that there was a certain element of the student population that was out there cramming in these for-profit training courses, and they were being given tools and strategies to be successful. And lo and behold, the evidence shows they were the ones that were getting the scholarships and getting into the best schools and the rest of them. So, in a sense, what that means is these training programs worked for the most part. And research on them suggests, when you look at the essay thing, that what these training programs were telling kids to do, strategies for being successful on the essay portion of the SAT, was make sure you write a lot. And make sure you use a lot of buzzwords and phony words, big words. You use the essay to brag on your vocabulary. It doesn't matter whether the word means what you intend it to mean. It doesn't matter. What they're looking at are the length of your words and the length of your essays and all of that. And so what one of these operations did, they took 20 students who didn't do nearly as well on the SAT as they had hoped, and they prepped them on the SAT and gave them strategies and vocabulary words to use, and just stick these words in there. They impressed the readers. And something like 75 to 80% of the students that went through this prep experience before they retook the SAT did substantially better the second time around and landed some of the highest scores, ended up in the 90th percentile, so to speak. The implication or the suggestion then is that the essay portion of the SAT for years has been graded on length and on the vocabulary words being used and all the rest of it. It didn't matter whether the essay said anything, whether the essay held together, whether it was well organized or anything. It was based on length. It's the old idea that teachers used to use about the essay exams, that the way they grade them is you just throw them up the stairs. The heaviest ones, the longest essays are the heaviest, therefore they go the farthest. The shortest ones don't go up the stairs that far because there's no weight to them. And the implication is that's the way essay exams were graded, totally subjectively, with no criteria, no standards or whatever. The research on the essay portion of the SAT over the last decade suggests that that's pretty much what's been operative in the SAT as well. So consequently, the new director of the College Board, who's a fairly reputable scholar, by the way, made the decision to drop the essay requirement in the SAT. What this story suggests is just an example of the fact that this is not rocket science we're dealing with here. An awful lot of this is subjective. And the fact of the matter is there are a number of reasons why certain people, from certain kids, from certain backgrounds and certain groups have a clear advantage in doing well under the current system. The Common Core standards are based on the assumption that that advantage that the few have is now an advantage that we're going to try to give to everybody. We're going to give everybody access to the keys to the kingdom. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to be able to take advantage of them. We're not naive. We don't believe that. But at least people are going to have a shot. I find it incredibly unbelievable that so many competent, reputable, intelligent people are finding it necessary to take a position against giving people this shot. I find it reprehensible, because these are the same people that scream standards and academic quality. And their basic position is that academic quality began to deteriorate when the enrollments in colleges and universities began to grow. The more colleges and universities opened themselves up to more people, the more the quality of academic rigor deteriorated. So these people believe that in order to restore academic credibility to our education system, you've got to return it to a time when education was focused only on the few. That runs totally counter to everything we believe in this republic, to everything that we believe here at the Virtual Center. It's not what the framers intended. It's not what the founding was about. It's not what the Constitution of the United States is about. It is surely not what the Declaration of Independence is about. But somehow we have been able to maneuver the situation in such a way that we have found a way to make it consistent with our efforts to continue to educate the few and to condemn the many to what effectively constitutes a second-class education. An education that up until the end of through the 20th century was an education aimed at people who, for the most part, were going to go to work in the industrial system. Curriculum, the entire school day, the model, the way schools were organized, everything was modeled on industry. And the idea was that the whole purpose of education was to prepare people for the workplace. Not the people that were intended to go to higher education. We're talking about the masses here. They were going to go into the workplace. So under the illusion, under the heading of tailoring education to the needs of the student, student-centered curriculum, where curriculum content is adjusted to the particular needs of the particular student. It would work in an industrial age. It does not work in this information communication age that we're in now. Competitively, our students are struggling. They aren't able to keep up because our education system has not kept up. It seems to me that the Common Core standards are designed and intended to begin to reverse that trend. And why people aren't willing to jump on board and make it work, recognizing that it's not perfect, obviously, and that it's going to have to be improved and tweaked and amended and all of this. We know that. But instead of everybody getting on board and saying, let's all give this a go and let's find ways to make it work, find out ways that it doesn't work, and we'll fix them. What we have are people who have drawn a line in the sand and saying, we've got to kill this. And the way we can kill it is to link it to the people who are pushing it. If government is pushing it, if big business is pushing it, if Bill Gates is pushing it, then there's got to be a hidden agenda to it. There's got to be something suspicious about it. Let's kill it. That's the context within which the political struggle over the Common Core is taking place. I think all of us need to be aware of that. All of us need to be cognizant of it. And all of us need to do our homework and find out exactly what the Common Core is about and what it promises for us and for our kids. And if it's something that we feel we can live with and it's something that gives our kids a better shot, then darn it, let's go for it. If we want to make it work, we'll make it work. And what that implies is to tell those people who are in the way, who are being obstructionists, to get out of the way. This is the beginning of a new day. We are really going to try to realize the potential that this republic was founded on, that all of us were created equal, that we were endowed by certain unalienable rights. All of us have a chance. All of us ought to have a chance. All of us ought to get the same chance, as much as we can possibly control. Granted, some people are going to come from better backgrounds and stronger backgrounds and come with different genetic makeup and all the rest of it. There are all these other factors that we can't do anything about. But in the areas where we can do something about it, it seems to me we have reached the point where it's time to do something about it. Today is the 27th of March in the year of our Lord 2014. Why not make today the day it begins? I think that, to be honest with you, congratulations to the state of Indiana are in order. We understand that you initially stood out there ahead of everybody else and embraced the Common Core. And then as a result of some pretty questionable information, faulty information, you had second thoughts and you backed off. And instead you set up your own system of standards. But you ought to be congratulated on recognizing the fact that standards are standards. And lo and behold, many of your standards are the same ones that you thought you were abandoning. More power to you. Don't look upon that as a mistake. Look upon that as a success. We are at 56 minutes after the hour. We're just reaching the top of our first hour. Let's pause here and take our break, and then when we come back, we're going to look at something pretty different, but I think you'll find that there's a little bit of similarity to some of the things that we've been talking about with the Common Core. I want to get into a little bit about the Supreme Court. And more specifically, I want to get into a little bit of the detail surrounding the Citizens United decision. But before we do that, let's pause and take a break. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We've been here today for close to 1 hour. We have 1 more hour to go. We're going to pause for a 5-minute break. We invite you to stay with us. Welcome. If you've been with us through the first hour, we thank you for staying with us. It's 1 minute past the hour of 4 in the East, 1 minute past the hour wherever you are. This is the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I am Bill O'Brien, and this is the not the 19th day of March, it's the 27th day of March. I've got the 19th day of March in my head because there's the program that we did last Wednesday, a week ago, which was the first time we went through the article that we reviewed yesterday, which was the Stone article on the philosophical article out of the New York Times on the ways that the ancient Greeks and the Hebrews and other peoples in the history of the world have tried to demonstrate that they really matter, that they made a difference while they were here on this earth. That was a special program, and I remember the date as being the 19th of March. For some reason, it's kind of implanted in my mind. That's a program that I continue to go back to in my mind periodically. But today is the 27th day of March. We are within striking distance of the 1st of April. And I believe this year the biggest joke on April Fool's Day is going to be the march that we came out of, because this is quite extreme. I encourage you to share with us your thoughts, your ideas, your comments, criticisms, or whatever. We have a phone number that is reserved just for such a purpose. The number is area code 304-658-3333. 304-658-3333. If you'd like to email me directly, by all means, I would love to hear from you. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. waobrien906@gmail.com. In fact, that's where the article, Gene sent me the link to the article that we were just talking about out of the New American on Indiana and its rescinding of the Common Core standards. So, you know, if you send me your ideas, and if they appear to be ideas that our listeners would appreciate, would like to hear, then I would love to share them with you. If you don't want to do it yourself by picking up the phone, then by all means send them to me, and I'll be glad to do it for you. I think the most important thing is that the product of your thought and your reflection is valuable. And we want to give it as much visibility and as much opportunity to be listened to and to be read by as many people as possible. I think that's what it's about. I think we all learn that way. So again, we would love to hear from you. I mentioned yesterday that one of the things I wanted to do today was to take on the case that was argued just yesterday before the Supreme Court. It is the Hobby Lobby case, the case of Sebelius versus Hobby Lobby. Sebelius obviously being Kathleen Sebelius, and member of the Obama administration. And Hobby Lobby being a store that many of us are quite familiar with. They sell art goods and pottery and decorate Christmas decorations and Valentine decorations, and it's a beautiful store. And as we know, many of us, if we've paid attention, Hobby Lobby is the owners of Hobby Lobby are very, very religious people. They do not open on Sundays. They adhere to the idea, scriptural idea of 6 days of work and the seventh day of rest. And they abide by the idea that they should not be open on the Lord's Day. Many of us have noted that. Many of us have respected it. Some of us don't think in this day and age it matters that much, but others of us respect people who still try to live the beliefs that they profess. I think there's something noble and enlightening and ennobling about people who try to live up what they profess to believe, live up to what they profess to believe. It's one thing to use the old cliche, it's one thing to talk the talk, but it's something else to walk the walk. And I think all of us, in our own way, respect people who do that, who try to live the way they tell other people to live. And again, while many of us have a problem with that, I think we do have an element of respect for people that at least try to live up to their own to their own criteria, their own principles. And so what I wanted to do was to take on that case, and I still want to. I'm beginning to think that it'll probably be into next week before we're able to give it its due, because one of the things that it seems to me almost essential that we do as a background to this is to look into the case of Citizens United. And the reason I say that, well, I mentioned this yesterday, but I'll repeat it here because I really think it's significant. A significant portion of Hobby Lobby's case before the Supreme Court is based on the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United. For those that perhaps don't remember the Citizens United case, or just remember a little bit about it, let me remind you that the Citizens United case is the case decided in 2010, which resulted in striking down limits on campaign finance. Remember the debates that were going on for so long over McCain-Feingold? The limitations on campaign funding and campaign spending imposed in an effort to try to keep big money out of our political campaigns in order to eliminate the illusion of unfairness and to give people the sense that big money was not able to go in and buy the results of our election campaigns. Well, that idea of limiting corporate contributions in political campaigns was challenged in 2009 before the Supreme Court in the case of Citizens United versus United States. And as a result of that decision rendered in June of 2010, portions of the campaign's finance reform legislation was struck down by the court, and corporations were given the opportunity to spend unlimited amounts of funds in our political campaign process. And the basis for that decision, and I think many of us will recall this, the basis for that decision was that the Supreme Court determined that political contributions were a form of political speech. And under the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, government is forbidden to infringe upon a person's freedom of speech. And under this decision, corporations are defined by the Supreme Court majority as persons. So the implication of this decision is that the establishment of the idea that corporations are persons under the 14th Amendment, and now corporations are persons under the First Amendment, seem to suggest that as persons, corporations would also be entitled to the other protections rendered to persons under the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And corporate behavior has acted accordingly. There are numerous examples of corporate attorneys who have refused to surrender corporate records to government regulators on the basis of the constitutional argument that the surrender of these corporate records would constitute a violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, because it would constitute illegal search and seizure on the part of the federal government. So consequently, corporations have resorted to the Fourth Amendment in order to deny regulators access to their records. And so the implication clearly is that we are liable to be just seeing the beginning of a series of cases where corporations are going to be coming back to the Supreme Court claiming yet another right under the Bill of Rights, a right which the framers accorded to persons, recognizing that in Citizens United, corporations were defined as persons, and that corporate spending was defined as a form of corporate speech. The Hobby Lobby case, in part at least, is based on that same premise. Hobby Lobby's attorneys make the point that if persons are protected from an infringement of their right to free speech under the First Amendment, corporations should also be entitled to protection of their rights to religious freedom. And the fact that the Affordable Care Act, i.e. Obamacare, mandates health insurance for the employees of companies like Hobby Lobby, and part of that health insurance pays for forms of contraception which the owners of Hobby Lobby believe could potentially constitute a form of abortion and thereby violate their religious beliefs, their religious principles. Therefore, they are arguing that the health care mandate in the Affordable Care Act which mandates that Hobby Lobby go against its own religious principles and contribute to the kind of health insurance which pays for procedures that they do not ethically and morally support is a violation of their First Amendment religious rights. I hope that I was able to explain that in a way which makes some sense. And as important as explaining it in a way that makes some sense, I hope that I was able to explain it in a way which was fair. My intent was to try not to explain it in such a skewed political way that the very words I was using and the tones that I was employing would constitute an ideological position on this very controversial issue. I didn't want to do that at the beginning. I wanted to try to be as fair and as objective in this as I can. It's not objective. It's obviously extremely emotional, more so for some people than for others. But the mere fact that it touches on so many people, and of course the connection to the Citizens United decision is clear. Because from Hobby Lobby's perspective, it stands to reason that if the Supreme Court came down on the side of the protection of financial contributions to political campaigns as free speech, then it stands to reason as being very logical that the First Amendment would apply equally in the protection of religious freedoms as it does to the principle of freedom of speech. In looking at some of the literature on the background to the Citizens United decision, I found much more information than I had anticipated was there. I guess in a way I felt a little bit uncomfortable with the fact that I didn't pick up on this before. I was taking my cue from the media's reports on Citizens United. I was responding to the interpretation of the finding that the media was covering. But the fact of the matter is, when you get into the decision itself, you begin to realize that there was so much more to the Citizens United decision than most of us are aware of, that it suddenly became clear to me that it's going to take some time to sift through the issues in Citizens United before we even get to the Hobby Lobby case. And I don't believe that there's anything wrong with this. Because the one thing that I've learned in our 10 or 11 months together here at the Virtual Center is that there's so much more to be learned about the Constitution and about the founders and about the way that the founders looked at the world, at least in the eyes of the Supreme Court. There's so much more to be learned by not looking only at the decisions and the justification for the decisions in key Supreme Court cases, but rather to look at the rationale and the justification for those conclusions. And to be very honest, there is oftentimes as much, if not more, to be learned by looking at the dissenting opinions in some of these cases, especially the controversial ones, the 5-4 decisions, by looking at the analysis at the pattern of legal thinking that goes into the interpretation of the Constitution and the intent of the founders in some of these dissenting opinions, we begin to see that the issue becomes much bigger than we ever thought it was just by looking at the final decision itself. If you think about this, it makes sense. There are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. All of them extremely competent, accomplished, experienced legal scholars, at least in theory. In a few cases about specific justices, there's some question about competence and the level of scholarship, etc. But I mean that. Some of it's political, but in some of it's serious. But the point I'm trying to make is what we're dealing with in any Supreme Court is 9 extremely competent, noted jurists. And in a 5-4 decision, that doesn't mean that you have 5 intelligent people and 4 boobs. Chances are you have competent scholarship in the dissents as well as in the majority opinions. And you can begin to learn so much from those dissents, as well as from reading the majority opinions. I think we recognized this yesterday when we looked at the article in the New York Times by Linda Greenhouse on the case involving the railroad right-of-ways, and whether in fact the 400-foot right-of-way, whether when the railroad stops operating, whether that right-of-way reverts to government or whether it goes to the particular property owner involved. And if you remember in yesterday's program, Linda Greenhouse's article made reference to the lone dissenting opinion of Sonia Sotomayor in this particular case, and specifically the final paragraph of her dissent, in which she made reference to the fact that as a result of this particular decision, which was rendered in favor of the property owner versus government, in an 8-1 decision, Sonia Sotomayor was the only negative, the only dissent. In her final paragraph, she makes the point that the potential of this decision is that tens of millions of dollars in public right-of-ways could potentially be heading into the hands of property owners rather than staying in the hands of government for public use. In other words, what we've called in the past the commons potentially took a beating in this decision. Because in legislation passed in 1983, Congress recognized that railroads were going out of business at a fairly rapid rate, and that was going to result in tens of thousands of acres of right-of-way government land that had been granted to the railroads initially that potentially now reverted to the public use. And the suggestion in the legislation was that much of this land be turned into rails to trails kind of operation, where walking trails and hiking trails and biking trails and all the rest of it would replace the current railroad beds that are there. And one of the things that Linda Greenhouse mentioned, and one of the things that I mentioned yesterday, was the extent to which this case could be the basis for future cases to come. In other words, when future right-of-way cases come up, courts are going to be able to go to this particular decision rendered just last week in the Supreme Court by the Roberts Court. And so what this case may symbolize is a precedent, a case that will become a precedent on which debates future decisions. It's very obvious to me in the little bit that I've done with the Supreme Court that Chief Justice Roberts is very much taken with the idea of legal precedence. And in fact, just yesterday, in discussing a little bit about the Citizens United decision, we addressed the legal precedent for Citizens United, which was rendered by the Supreme Court in 1976, when Justice Rehnquist was Chief Justice. And in that particular decision, which was National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti, which is a Massachusetts case, which dealt with the issue of the First National Bank of Boston violating campaign spending limits in making political campaign contributions. While the court upheld the constitutionality of the campaign spending limits for corporations, it made a point of emphasizing this in 1976. The court made a point to emphasize that corporate contributions to political campaigns must be viewed in the context of political speech, which becomes clearly a precedent for Citizens United. That's pretty much what most of us know about the Citizens United decision, and many of us are concerned because it has resulted in the infusion of tens of millions of dollars in political campaigns. What some of us didn't know, I didn't know, was that in the background to the Citizens United decision, there's an awful lot of untapped information. It was a 5-4 decision. The minority dissent was assigned to Justice John Paul Stevens. This is kind of the way that the Supreme Court works when they take a vote. In the majority decision, the 5 of the 5-4, as Chief Justice, John Roberts has the honor of either writing the dissenting of opinion or assigning it to one of the other members of the majority. In Citizens United, Roberts assigns the writing of the majority opinion to Justice Kennedy. Of the 4 dissenting votes in Citizens United, the right to write the dissenting opinion or to assign it to somebody else is awarded to John Paul Stevens. And Justice Stevens assigns to Justice Souter the honor of writing the dissenting opinion in Citizens United. It turns out that that is the last legal opinion that Justice Souter wrote because he retired in the midst of this case. This was his last case. So there's absolutely no question. I mean, I didn't talk to them or anything, but there's absolutely no question. When Justice Stevens asked Justice Souter to write the dissenting opinion, undoubtedly he knew that this would probably be Justice Souter's final opinion. One has to presume that he knew that. One has to presume as well, and I haven't seen this written anywhere, but it makes perfect sense to me. One has to presume as well that if you look at this from Justice Souter's position, if I am a lifelong member of the judicial profession, and this is my last written opinion as a justice on the Supreme Court of the United States, I'm going to make it a memorable one. I'm going to make sure that the opinion I write contributes to the idea that when I'm gone, people will know that I mattered, to go back to yesterday's program. In other words, when I write this opinion, it's going to be a doozy. Well, let me tell you that it is. Justice Souter's dissenting opinion is 90 pages long. It is immense. Not only that, but it is extremely critical of the Roberts Court and extremely critical of the majority in this case. Extremely critical. Let me tell you how critical. Justice Souter writes that in this Citizens United decision, Chief Justice Roberts manipulated the decision, manipulated this case in such a way that he made it possible for the majority to make the decision in Citizens United which decided questions that were not even raised by the litigants. Think about that. The two sides, Citizens United and the Federal Elections Commission, take it upon themselves to argue the case before the Supreme Court, looking for a favorable decision for their particular argument. And the final decision that the court reaches goes way beyond anything either one of them asked for. It touches on issues that none of the attorneys on either side even raised. The implication of that, the only logical conclusion one can draw from that, is that, assuming that we're talking about Justice Roberts here, since he's the Chief Justice, and he is in the majority, the assumption here is that the majority in general, and the Chief Justice in particular, used this case and manipulated it in such a way as to be able to make a decision on issues that weren't even on the table. Political issues. That for political reasons, ideological reasons, personal reasons, whatever kind of reasons they might be, key members of the majority were using this decision to make a political statement, and they were force-fitting this to fit the case. or to put it the other way around, they were manipulating the case to fit the political decision that they wanted to render. That's incredible. It's even more incredible for one member of the Supreme Court to say that about another. Justice Roberts makes the case, makes the point, that Justice Souter took the opportunity availed him in being asked to write the dissenting opinion. And this is Justice Roberts' terms. He took this opportunity to air the court's dirty laundry, to let the world know some of the aspects of the Supreme Court's business that members of the Supreme Court would prefer that the general public not know. And one of the most interesting aspects of this case is that even though there was a 5-4 majority, and even though there was a majority opinion actually written by Justice Kennedy, Roberts assigned to Kennedy the opportunity to write up the majority opinion. Other members of the majority took it upon themselves to write concurring opinions. Justice Scalia being the most notable. What does that say? It says that other members of the court, like Justice Scalia, were using this case to say things they wanted to say. They supported the majority opinion, but they wanted to make sure that some of the things they wanted to say about it got out there. And so they took it upon themselves to write concurring opinions. So the fact of the matter is, if you're going to do research on Citizens United, you're talking about a research project that potentially incorporates dozens of hours, because you're reading any number of decisions and opinions. And the fact of the matter is, looming behind it all is Justice Souter's 90 pages of dissenting opinion. In a nutshell, if I can, I've already gone through some of the ingredients of the key issues associated with the case. I pulled this off the internet, and it's basically a summary about the 4 major positions of the majority and the 4 major positions of the minority. It kind of nails down exactly what the case was about. According to this analysis, this is what Citizens United was all about. For the majority, which included Justices Kennedy, Roberts, Alito, Scalia, and Justice Thomas, Clarence Thomas, the majority of 5 argued the following. 1. Barring independent political spending amounts to squelching free speech protected by the First Amendment. In other words, to the majority, what the key to the decision was, that it barred independent political spending amounts to squelching free speech protected by the First Amendment. In other words, it barred that. It denied government the opportunity to squelch free speech by barring independent political spending. Translation, it made spending, it opened spending wide up. Open wide. You can spend as much as you want. Second, to the majority, the decision is based on this, that the First Amendment protects not just the person's right to speak, but the act of speech itself, regardless of the speaker. Therefore, the First Amendment protects the speech of corporations and unions, whether we consider them people or not. The majority opinion goes out of its way to distinguish between a person's right to speak and the act of speaking itself. And the majority comes down on the side of interpreting the First Amendment to say that the First Amendment does not just protect a person's right to speak, it also protects speech itself, regardless of the speaker. Therefore, the majority reasons, the First Amendment protects the rights of corporations as well as unions to speak, whether you consider them persons under the First Amendment or not. In other words, that emphasis from people's right to speak to the speech itself is important, because once you put the emphasis on the speech itself, irrespective of the speaker, that means whoever has a position falls under the category of speech. So that emphasis is important to the majority opinion. Third, although government has the authority to prevent corruption or even the appearance of corruption, it has no place in determining whether large political expenditures are either of those things, so it may not impose spending limits on that basis. The court acknowledges government's right to try to preserve the sanctity of the political system, of the election system, by preventing corruption or even the illusion of corruption. But government does not have the power to take that authority, that right, to prevent corruption, and turn around and use it by limiting large expenditures on the basis that big money is corrupt. And therefore the government has the right to impose spending limits. So the issue that the majority opinion is challenging here is the assumption that corporate spending in political elections by definition is corrupt. And the majority is arguing you can't make that case. That's too big a leap. You can't make that jump. And then fourth, the majority opinion means the public has the right to hear all available information, and spending limits prevent information from reaching the public. If the First Amendment is going to protect speech itself rather than the person speaking, then in order to make informed political decisions, the voter, the public, has to have access to all speech from wherever it comes from. Therefore, any effort to prevent information from reaching the public is a violation of the First Amendment rights to free speech. That, in summary, is the majority opinion. That's what Justice Kennedy writes. The dissenting opinion, the minority of four, Justices John Paul Stevens, Justice Ginsburg, Justice Breyer, and Justice Sotomayor, their argument is based on the following. First, that the First Amendment protects only individual speech, not speech by associations of individuals. Their argument is that the First Amendment applies only to individual persons, not to groups of persons, whether they be corporations or unions. Second, their dissenting opinion is based on the idea government may prevent corruption, and campaign spending can be corrupt when it buys influence over legislators. Therefore, government may impose spending limits on corporations and unions. In other words, the minority dissenting opinion makes the case that because unlimited campaign spending can buy influence, which in effect corrupts the political system, corrupts the election, therefore that fact gives government the power to limit spending, corporate spending, and union spending. Third, government may prevent the appearance of corruption, which undermines public confidence in democracy. Limits on corporate and union political spending are an expression of that authority. It is very important to government, the minority is saying. It is very important that the people see that government is making a concerted effort to prevent even the appearance of corruption by limiting the amount of money that can go into political campaigns. People's faith in democracy is strengthened or weakened depending on how much faith they have in the sanctity of the system. So the minority's position is it's very important in order to send the message to the people that government is doing everything it can not only to prevent corruption, but to prevent even the illusion of corruption, the appearance of corruption, by imposing spending limits. And fourth, the minority position argues that the public has a right to hear all available information. And when corporations spend money that individuals can't match, messages from corporations drown out the messages from others. And consequently, that information fails to reach the public. So it's a different spin on the same issues. In other words, the four positions that the majority asserts are the same four positions that the minority denies. And the last one is that because corporate spending can overwhelm individual spending, that means that the opinion of the individual doesn't have a chance against the opinion of the corporation because of the amount of power that money buys. Consequently, the public is denied access to the information of individuals because it's being overwhelmed with the opinions of corporations. I think you will agree with me that if you read these four positions of the majority and four positions of the minority, you begin to get a sense of why legal thinking is so obtuse, is so difficult. Because the distinctions are very fine. It's very, very difficult to distinguish the key ingredients of these positions. I would be remiss if I didn't make one further observation. It's pretty obvious, just from looking at these 4 points on the one side and 4 points on the other, that in order to understand these positions, you've got to be able to read. Let me put it another way. if you think about it, there aren't many of our public schools that are turning out students well enough, able to read well enough to pinpoint the distinctions between these positions, because they are fine. They are fine distinctions. This is the challenge. If we are going to open up opportunity, educational opportunity to everyone, theoretically through the Common Core standards, but perhaps at some point in time in the future through some other reform mechanism, which we don't know about as yet, but whatever it is, if we're going to really provide equal opportunity for everybody, then we've got to make sure that everybody reads well enough to be able to make these fine distinctions. And if they can, they deserve a shot at moving into this field. If they can't, that's fine. But the fact of the matter is, if you assume going in that most students can't read and understand this anyway, so the only way they can basically get any sense out of it at all is if I explain it to them, because they can't understand it. If that's your approach to education, then those you teach don't have a chance. So I think that is a very, very significant point. A little bit of background on Citizens United. And we've got about 8 minutes left. 8 minutes left in our program. So we're not going to even begin to get in to Justice Souter's dissents. But we can do that Monday, and then we can move in from there into the Hobby Lobby situation as well. But a little bit of background on Citizens United. This isn't surprising, but it's illuminating, it seems to me. Citizens United is a conservative lobbying group, political lobbying group, that was created in the 1990s and was well funded by key conservative funding sources, one of which is the Koch brothers. Ta-da! Citizens United was a group that they formed. And in the election of 2004, Citizens United was responsible for putting together a film, a very critical film, on Hillary Clinton. Ta-da! Some things change and some things don't. They wanted the opportunity to run this film, which is very critical of Hillary Clinton, on cable television and on satellite television on a pay-per-view basis. And the Federal Election Committee ruled against them because they claimed it violated McCain-Feingold, which stipulated that no money or media outlet can take a position on a particular candidate or a particular party in the days immediately preceding an election, because it would have an unfair effect and outcome impact on the election. And Citizens United decided to kick the case upstairs to the Supreme Court. Much of this information I got from Wikipedia, and I know a lot of people don't like Wikipedia, But I would suggest to you it's a good source of information as long as you don't take it to the bank for its accuracy. Too many people have found too many details to be incorrect. But the fact of the matter is the basic information is solid and it's quick. When the case came to the Supreme Court, the original oral argument for government was delivered by Deputy Solicitor General Malcolm Stewart, representing the Federal Elections Commission. And he argued before the court that the government, under a decision reached previously called Austin versus Michigan Chamber of Commerce, that the government would have the power to ban books if those books contained even one sentence expressly advocating the election or the defeat of a candidate and were published by or distributed by a corporation or a union. In other words, he's laying out the real world truths of the federal election law, which we call McCain-Feingold. That in order to protect the security and the sanctity of the election process, the government would have the power to ban a book if that book contained even one sentence which advocated the election or the defeat of a particular candidate, and if it were published or distributed by a corporation or by a union. That's the Solicitor General's sense as to what McCain-Feingold was all about. Stewart went on, and he argued further that under this Supreme Court decision called Austin versus Michigan Chamber of Commerce, the government could ban the digital distribution of political books even on Amazon's Kindle, or prevent a union from hiring a writer to author a political book. In other words, so tight was McCain-Feingold to protecting the political system and to preventing even the illusion of corruption that government's power to protect the sanctity of the election process was pretty solid. In a 2012 article by by Jeffrey Toobin, it's an article that appeared in 2012 in the New Yorker magazine. According to Toobin, the Supreme Court expected that after the oral argument that it would be asked to rule on the narrow question which was the original case, namely, could Citizens United show the Hillary Clinton film? At the subsequent conference among the justices after the oral arguments were made, the vote was 5-4 in favor of Citizens United being able to show the film. And in the 5-4 majority, the swing vote was rendered by Justice Anthony Kennedy. Chief Justice John Roberts, as a result of the privileges of his office, was in charge of writing the majority opinion, and he chose to do it himself. His opinion was narrow. It focused on the issues of the case. Namely, it focused on McCain-Feingold being allowed, whether McCain-Feingold could prevent the showing of the Hillary Clinton film. A concurring opinion written by Justice Kennedy argued that the court should go much further than that in this case. And that opens the can of worms, the Pandora's box, that makes Citizens United one of the most fascinating political decisions rendered by the Supreme Court. Bob Kincaid said one of the most important decisions since Dred Scott. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wait until next week to go into this because we've reached the end of our program. It's 1 minute before the hour, top of the hour. Please have a wonderful week, a wonderful evening. Be safe. Take care of yourself. We want to have you back here at the Virtual Center. We want to keep you as a supporter of the Head On Radio Network. For the Virtual Center, this is Bill O'Brien saying goodbye and thank you.